Hey, mathfails. I'd like to have a conversation with you. You don't owe me one or anything, of course. But I would like to have one with you. I value you. I think you have a lot of potential as a philosopher. On the other hand, I'm not sure. You mentioned that you have tokens, talismans, something to forget what the metaphor was to find your home base point, and I'm not entirely sure of that. For example, my materialism is entire. See, I'm familiar with what you're going through. I call it decomposing your personality, and I can talk about that in a minute. But it's the reason. It's like Gary recognizes me as a phantasmagorical, and yet a lot of people don't because of my materialism. Well, let me tell you, yeah, at base, I have this approach of exploring these same kinds of limitless possibilities that you seem to enjoy uh, in terms of speculation. And as I've said, at one time, I thought maybe life really was a dream of the sort that you could, wake up, start to lucid dream. I considered it as a possibility. And when I say there was a time, I was a teenager. Okay. Um, but I entertained that maybe in some sense it was like that, through my 20s and still to today to some degree, because it turns out that, physically we are all creatures of energy. But in terms of it being something like a dream where you might have a lucid dream all of a sudden, that has to be shed. It's very dangerous to be a creative sort and not have a way to have to base yourself in what we call the material world. And that's the importance of having a subjectivist definition of materialism, so you know how to ground yourself. And it really just means that in the choice you're making in your life, you have to look at the material consequences. If you lose friends, or relatives are saying, well, this and that and the other, maybe they're judgmental. You have to look at the material consequences. Doesn't mean you have to decide it's they give in to those consequences and go, oh no, well, I won't do any. Maybe sometimes you have to lose some friends when you're going through changes. Sometimes you have to buck what your family's telling you to do, no doubt. But you always have to remember these material consequences. That's the material reality that you need to be individual with respect to. So that you know that if you're making a decision that you have a certain consequence. When people go a little bit nuts, they forget that there's a material consequence, and then they're always forever acting like, why is this going on? Why is this happening to me? Why am I being treated this way? Why is this thing, always seem to be going a particular way? And it's like, well, because you're not looking at the material consequences, or else you'd know. And then you might not change, but at least you'd change the way you reacted to these things. It wouldn't be so confusing. Now, I mentioned when I put on the voices and talked about mind mucus and cancer. These are two metaphors of the kinds of things you find in your brain, or your mind, rather, when you take it apart, meaning some things are just like infections. They can be very serious, but you can also clean them up like an infection. Other things are more like cancers, tumors, growths on their own. They can be attached into your mind, hard to take away. They can even be things you use for some positive or survival-oriented uh, behavior you have, right? So, why am I talking about these ailments in terms of decomposure? Well, before I mention that, let me just say, what you're doing is decomposure. Now, I call it that. It's always virtual, you always are just your one mind, even if you break it down into parts. But for example, when you channel your feelings strongly, like channeling a character, you're magnifying a small part of your brain and letting it become the whole. This is the sense in which you decompose yourself. You are dealing with the parts one at a time. They get to be whole. You have to do it over time, but you're basically you're looking with a microscope and showing, to others, uh, some part of yourself, transformed and whatnot, but some part of yourself. And these. By the way, to turn this kind of thing on, you have to be careful. Now, where do these things come from? I mean, they come from all sorts of deep archetypes, cartoons you saw. Maybe the archetype in the cartoon, comes from somewhere deep, you know, whatever. They're powerful. When you go and turn it on, you think you're in control of it. Look, I'm in control of the spigot. But when you turn that on, it doesn't mean you'll be able to close it. It might jam. It might be harder to close than to open. Often they are. Or the current from it might be pouring out right there. Where how are you going to get back to the thing to turn it off? It's a tumult there. But anyway, why am I talking about these ailments at all? And it's because that's what justifies having your mind separated out and apart, where you let the individual parts act as though they're individuals, even though they're still all connected through your physical material body, for example. Well, if, let's say I come over to your house and you have your car all taken apart all over, and you tell me you've been working on your car, and I say, oh, what's the matter with it? And you say, nothing. So, what? There has to be a reason. In that case, obviously, the reason is you just love cars. It was the only one you had to take apart. Great, shows potential. That love of being a mechanic shows potential. It also shows an immaturity, and you a kind of irresponsibility. He had to call you to come so he could go to the grocery because he didn't even get it back together. And when he matures, he'll have other cars to work on. He'll work on his car when it needs to be fixed. The fact that your car is broken is an important part of the explanation of why you have it disassembled, why you're working on it, why you have made it even less likely to run because you've removed the engine and you're doing something to the engine. If you're doing it just for fun or to explore or to learn, that's great. On the other hand, as you mature, the engineer's approach to this is to have test beds. If you know how to build cars so much you love to take them apart, you can pretty much find a body of a car and start to build a car and use that one. This is a metaphor we're talking about for decomposing yourself, right? Okay, so it's the same sort of thing, If you are taking yourself apart, then it needs to be because you're fixing yourself, which means that you don't get to have any trips about what other people should learn and why don't they learn this and they need to figure this out, or I have this tool kit that is well, I don't know why I brought that up. I want to talk about the shamanism toolkit, but that anyway. When you're making these points, you don't ultimately won't have any justification for anything like that, whether you're right or wrong separately. Why? Because the point is you have your brain apart to fix your brain. That could be the only point. You don't take your car apart to fix somebody else's car, right? See what I'm saying? So you can't take your car apart and then say, my God, world, you need to have a clean carburetor. See, when you start telling the world what to do when you have your own mind apart, inevitable projection. It's just inevitable projection. So when you have your mind apart and you want to talk to other people, you've got to be very careful not to be telling them how to live. I would like to talk about shamanism, and I would like to challenge you. I think, mathfails, honestly, you are really smart. I've learned from you things and have a lot to learn from you. But I'm also older and more mature, and let me just say that you may be leaving breadcrumbs, but it's ironic because, sometimes when you're leaving breadcrumbs, you should be following breadcrumbs. Okay, and so I'd like to talk about this shamanistic toolkit, and I think I've got some tools that could give you a run for your money. For example, I don't think you're finding your ground point with your current tokens. I really don't. And I think a lot of the things I presented to you are exactly those sorts of tokens, and you should consider applying them